Hey guys, how's it going? So I'm out in the greenhouse this morning and I'm going to put together a miniature garden. I've been looking forward to this project because I've been gathering up some really fun shade plants, and that's kind of the focus, is to create something that doesn't need a ton of light in order to do really well. And I'm utilizing all pieces other than the plants, like I bought those, but everything else I've had for a long time. Like starting with the container here, I've used this container in several different projects, succulent arrangements, fairy gardens, a few fairy gardens, I think. I got this out of my grandpa's shed years and years ago. I mean, it's just like this old rusty kind of like oil pan. I don't even know what he used it for. But I popped a couple of drain holes in the bottom initially, like right when I very first started to use it. So it's a perfect shape because it's deep enough to where plants are happy in it for quite a long time, but it's not so tall that things look out of proportion. Because you know, when you use a taller container, you feel like you need a centerpiece that kind of brings the height up so that not all the weight is just in the container, like the weight of the design. And then I love the fact that it's got handles. It makes it super easy to move around. The second thing I have here, this came from Gardener's Supply. It initially came with succulents in it that I have used in other projects. I kind of was in a tight spot and I needed a couple Haworthia, which was what were in here. So I popped them out, and then I thought, you know what, I've had this sitting around for at least a year, maybe 2 years. Maybe that was 2 years ago, Christmas time, around Christmas time. Anyway, so I popped the stuff that was in there. There was like a little liner and some moss, and you can even see some remnants of stones that were glued in there. There was like a glued on stone layer to kind of hide the soil around the succulents. But anyway, I thought this would be kind of perfect with this base container because they both have a rustic look to them, and then I could create a tiny bit more height. I went behind our barn. I found an old cedar shake right here, and just some other random like pieces of bark and wood. I think I'm going to try to build a structure today. So I got these things, and I have a little saw that I'll be using to cut my shake into pieces. And then I went behind the gazebo to our juniper tree and cut a branch, which I'm going to cut into smaller pieces. This one has really cool looking bark on it. So I might use these as some vertical beams for our structure. Got a hot glue gun here so I can hot glue it all together. And then as far as fairy garden pieces go, these are things I've just had forever. In fact, if I end up putting fairies in it, I thought these little gray ones would be perfect because they don't like look kind of cartoonish. Some fairy gardens can look a little cartoonish because of how much color they have, which is very sweet. Like a lot of them are very sweet looking, but I think that this is the right kind of vibe. I used this in a miniature succulent fairy arrangement. First year we were making videos, maybe? I can't remember, a long time ago. It's got a broken foot that I've glued back on since then. I've got another one that is missing a wing, so we're gonna maybe see if we can utilize her and tuck her in maybe to a plant a little bit so you can't tell that she's missing a wing. And then just a few other things, little terracotta pots, cute little pumpkins. These might give it a little bit of a fall vibe, but I've used these in a fairy garden before. And then this tub right here just has kind of like fencing pieces, like little twigs and little wood rounds that you can make little pathways with. But the plants are beautiful. This is a hosta called Maui Buttercups. Let me tip it toward you so you can see. Now this one will get kind of big in the landscape, like it'll get a couple feet wide, but you can get away when they're this small, putting them into a miniature garden and letting them just chill for a little while. A fern called Robust. There's some Leptinella, which is a ground cover and lends beautiful contrasting color, especially to this chartreuse green. Couple different kinds of moss over here. Irish moss and Scotch moss, fern, oxalis. I've got a few more plants back here, and that's pretty much it. Oh, and I've got my soil back here. So I'll just be using regular, this is the Spoma Organic Potting Mix. That's what all these plants will like. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go grab kind of a work table so I can clear this space so I've got some elbow room, and then I'm just gonna start building this thing. I kind of have a vision for how I want it to be. Like I'm thinking this is a raised up layer. We're gonna create a structure in it, kind of, maybe out to the side of it, and then fill in with plants. We're just gonna have to see how this evolves. So I think we're going to maybe speed this part up because it's gonna be a lot of kind of like standing back and checking it out, and it might take a while. So here we go. think it ended up turning out really cute. I was a little nervous as I was starting to construct the lean-to little structure because it kept kind of flopping, like the pieces kept flopping around, and I just didn't know. It seemed kind of rough compared to what I was seeing in my head. But I think once I started, you know, getting the moss in there and adding some extra branches like this one right here that comes across and makes it a little bit more decorative rather than just such a strict structure, I started to really like how it was coming together. I did end up having to hot glue the two smaller vertical pieces into the bowl, like onto the inside of the bowl, just to keep them more stable as I was messing with the rest of the structure. But these on this side are just resting in the soil. So I just punched the sticks down in the soil and it's being held by that. I used 4 4-inch plants, actually 3.5, because the Leptinella, this is called Platt's Black. I only used half of it. So see that right there? I cut it in half because the plant was way too big to use the whole thing, and it's totally fine. I'm going to repot it in more soil and it will fill this can pretty quickly. The Hosta is awesome. I love it. Pachysandra called Green Carpet, and then the Maidenhair Fern in the back here. And then I used 1 6-pack of the moss. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of the mosses up here. So what I did is I kind of hot glued a barrier, almost like a soil reservoir, on top of the roof. So I started with some sticks and hot glued those kind of as a sides, if you will. And then I made the sides a little taller with some moss. And I just used green moss. I think I forgot to show you that in the beginning. Oh, it's called Mood Moss. It's from Super Moss. It's just a really nice, it's a dyed moss. So it's not living, it'll stay a nice green color no matter how long you have it in this arrangement. Although it does bleach a tiny bit if you've got it in the sun, but since this is for shade, this should be fine. And then I cut, because the 6-pack root balls were still fairly good size, like pretty deep, I cut them about in half and then just set my moss in there and then tucked a bunch of moss, a bunch of the Mood Moss around the root ball. So in order to maintain a roof like this, you just want to make sure it stays fairly moist, which is easier to do in the shade than it is to do in the sun. And I would just use like a large syringe, which I did not bring out here. We've showed it to you several times in videos, or even like a spray bottle or like a pump sprayer that's got just water in it to just gently water the roof. And it should hold up fine. I love living roofs. I actually had bought one of those flats of sedums, and it was a mixed flat. It was really cute looking. But I think the moss gave it the right vibe for a shade area, and the sedum wouldn't have loved it. But I think it's perfect that there are little fairy-esque flowers coming off the moss right now. They're the sweetest, most dainty looking things ever. Then I came in when I was all done planting with some mulch, just so I could cover up the potting soil, and it looks fairly similar except for you don't see the little pearls of perlite, the little white specks in the soil, which to me can kind of tend to make it look a little messy or not finished. So I just top dressed that and then placed these are little birch rounds, little pieces of wood as stepping stones leading up into the area where the little fairy's at. And then 1 table and 1 chair. I do have a second chair, but I felt like it made the garden look a little bit too cluttered. Plus there's only 1 fairy in here, so it makes sense that way. And then there's a little terracotta pot. I popped a little piece of moss down in there, the living moss, and then a few little juniper branches that I had left over and tied them together at the top, kind of like a little obelisk. And then, of course, the little fairy in there, I only ended up really having space for the 1. And the very last thing I went out and grabbed, I went behind the greenhouse to where I'm growing my hops. That's what these are right up here, so check that out. Hops dry beautifully, and I thought that it would make kind of an interesting looking, almost like cabbage-esque look to the front here, so that it wasn't so plain. And then I had a couple of longer branches that had some cute little hops hanging off. They also had leaves on them, but since they're so fresh, the leaves would wilt. They would end up drying, and they would be kind of just, I mean, they're pretty in fall arrangements and such when they're brown, but I thought that just having the hops would be nice. So I clipped all the leaves off, so it kind of looks like this essentially, instead of having big leaves, which the leaves look like this right here. That's what I clipped off, and they're already kind of starting to wilt. And I didn't really want that it kind of would have given it a messy look, I think. In terms of watering, I treat this just like, or I will treat this just like any other of my fairy gardens. Typically, all my decorations are up front, all my plants are around back, so I can come in with a watering can from the back side, or even a water bottle. Those work really nice because they're really easy to control. You're not afraid to like over slosh extra water into the back. but I water each plant from the back side so that I fully saturate the root system, but I don't flood the whole container to where it's going to mess up any of my more ornaments up front. I'm just really excited with how this turned out because, you know, going in with kind of an idea and then some old pieces that I had hanging around, sometimes it's hard to get inspired with old stuff that you have had forever. I don't know if you guys are the same way, but you keep looking at the same pieces and you're like, I don't really know how I can make that different or what should I do with that. But there's always some fun stuff. I mean, as long as you have a hot glue gun, you can put something really fun together just out of scraps out of your garden, branches and little pieces of wood. I mean, you can make your own little furniture. It's just really fun just to explore those ideas and see what they turn into. Sometimes you make them into something amazing, and sometimes you're like, well, I need a little more practice, but it's all practice, right? And it's all fun. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed seeing this little miniature garden come together. I hope you're having a great day, and we will see you in the next video. Bye.